Hey folks, Crossflux here with some more musings for my enigmatic mind. You're probably aware of how much I enjoy YuGiOh. Although this game is very near and dear to my heart, I can't refute that it's a truly flawed and broken game. I've seen a lot of arguments online that say old YuGiOh was better. Although I do personally prefer older YuGiOh, I have to disagree with this sentiment. Older YuGiOh wasn't better, just different. In fact, I'd say that YuGiOh through the ages has changed more than any other card game. The YuGiOh of today is a radically different game from the one I grew up playing. It's essentially YuGiOh in name only, and I am sure that the YuGiOh of tomorrow will be something even more different. There's a lot to love and hate concerning this game, and I've felt for years that the game needs to simply be rebooted. This way, the designers can take a step back and really think about what kind of game they want to make, without having to worry about 25 plus years of cards and mechanics to consider. I do not envy modern designers at Konami at all for trying to balance things and create a game that continues to engage thousands of players across the world. So let me take a crack at it. Yeah, I'm crazy enough to try my hand at rebooting YuGiOh and creating a brand new rule set that's both honoring to what came before, but also liberal enough to take advantage of the many other card games that have come out since. Let me start this grand undertaking with what I believe to be the biggest problem with YuGiOh, the resource system. In a card game, it's important to have limits on how much a player can do in a single turn. I believe that a good foundation has to have at least two limiting factors. Let's look at a few examples from other card games. Magic the Gathering has its mana system, as well as your hand of cards to play from. In Magic, you can theoretically do as much as you like, but you must be able to spend enough mana to play the cards and activate the various effects. Outside of special effects, most players wind up with gaining one new mana source every turn. This creates a state where turns are fairly simple in the early game, but slowly ramps up as the game comes to a close. The Digimon card game also has two limiting factors. You can only play cards from your hand, and you must carefully manage the shared memory gauge. The more memory you spend on your turn, the more your opponent starts with on theirs. This is a beautiful check and balance system. These are only two examples, but I don't want to take up too much time on this aspect alone, so let's just go ahead and take a look at what YuGiOh has. Duelists can play cards freely from their hands, with the only real stipulation being that you get one normal summon per turn. This is hardly a problem, as the vast majority of summons in the game are special, which have no restrictions. Aside from the cards readily available to you, there is essentially no limit to how much one can do on their turn. This only gets exacerbated when you take into consideration how much draw and search power duelists have access to these days. Plus, the extra deck and even the graveyard are further sources for cards and effects. Suffice to say, things have really gotten out of hand. Konami has inadvertently created a positive feedback loop. As duelists have more things to do on their turns, they needed to create more ways to engage with their opponent and/or interrupt them. This is why the game is now riddled with hand traps, boards full of negates, and various floodgate options. The way I see it, there are two ways to handle this. One, add an additional limiting factor to this reboot of YuGiOh, something like a mana system. Or two, keep it the way it is, but instantiate more built-in limits to cards, such as all effects being hard once per turns, and/or limiting the number of ways to plus in card advantage. In the spirit of keeping the feel of YuGiOh alive, I prefer to go with the latter option. After all, part of the appeal of YuGiOh is the explosive plays. With this design philosophy in mind, let me go ahead and propose some of the major changes I'd implement into my reboot idea. First of all advanced summon mechanics will still be handled via the extra deck. Link, Xyz, Synchro, Fusion, and even Ritual monsters will all be extra deck monsters. There also won't be any need for spell cards to initiate some of these special summons, so no more need for polymerization or various ritual spells. Instead, it'll simply be a game of gathering the appropriate resources. All fusion summons will essentially be relegated to contact fusion. Ritual monsters will require a certain number of tributes, in addition to possibly having a spell card as an optional replacement for a tribute monster. Next, zones and board placement will be an integral part of the game. I've always hated how the specific zones of the dueling field are barely relevant. Link monsters were a great step in the right direction, it's just they backpedaled on the idea. Plus the game was never built around zone placement, so the introduction of links kinda felt a little awkward in that way. My solution is to give players 10 zones each, but there's no stipulation between monster and or spell and trap zones. You still have 5 zones in the front and 5 zones in the back, but you can place monsters on the back, spells and traps in the front, however you want. Again though, placement is key because various destruction effects will now more commonly address zones with a certain distance from the source of the effect, rather than simply target a monster your opponent controls and destroy it. Thus, the back row is usually more safe, but is also less likely to be able to reach far enough into enemy territory to be impactful. An example would be something like the reboot of Fissure. Say you activate it in one of your frontmost zones. It now has a reach of 2 zones, allowing you to hit a wide variety of your opponent's field. But if you choose to activate it in the back row, because your front row is already filled with a bunch of monsters or traps or whatever, then your options for using it are limited. The only special zones here are the leftmost and rightmost back row zones. These would still be reserved for pendulum scales. Tied to this repositioning and zone placement are attack and defense modes for monsters. This will be unchanged, with the exception of Link monsters. Link monsters will now be able to go into defense mode. This would create a scenario where now their Link arrows are pointing in different directions, which could matter. There would also have to be new cards and effects that allow you to move cards around the field more freely in order to dodge effects and such. Finally, flip monsters are near and dear to my heart. I hate that they're just too slow in the modern setting. To remedy this, set monsters can be flipped face up at quick speed as if they were a trap card. This next major rule change is easily the most drastic change, so I understand if a few of you abhor this idea, but hear me out. As we all know, life points hardly matter in Yu-Gi-Oh! The only time they're relevant is in Game 3 in a tournament setting, where a slight bit of chip damage can earn you the win in time. I could fix this by making life points matter more, but I prefer to use a different method, drawing upon the ideas found in other card games, specifically other Japanese card games. Games like Duel Masters, Digimon, Wicross. In these games, victory is earned by landing a direct attack on an opponent who has no shields left. Adapting this idea into Yu-Gi-Oh! Had me come up with the following win condition. Landing a single direct attack on your foe who has no cards left in their hand earns you the dub. If your opponent still has cards in their hand, you must send one of them randomly to the graveyard for each direct attack. Since resource management is now really important in this version, you'll need to balance how aggressive you are with your said resources. Since you can now more freely play cards from your hand with little restriction, there's a balance in place, because you might want to hold a few cards back so that you don't have to worry about a stray direct attack ending your game. The idea is that you have to back your opponent into a corner and fully deplete their resources in order to secure the victory. Well, I think that's about it. That was a fun thought experiment for me. Obviously, this is just rough ideas on paper. I haven't even scrapped together fake cards to test any of these ideas out. They're simply the musings of a rambling mind. I've probably ruffled a few feathers with this one, so please let me know what you've thought of my ideas in the comments below. Basically, I'm just going off of my own intuition and years of experience with various TCGs. You may notice also that a lot of these ideas have actually already been used by Konami themselves via Rush Duels, which I am a fan of. Anyways, let me know what changes you would make to the game of Yu-Gi-Oh! And why you wouldn't make some changes. Until next time, have a blessed day.